I got married when I was 17 and Steve was 22. Now our 12-year marriage is over. I cheated on my husband. It was a story as old as time. I was out of town on the East Coast doing job training. The classes lasted 6 weeks. I'm 29 now, so it wasn't surprising that everyone in the class was actively interacting with me. Men did this all the time, and some women too. One of the guys, Mark, a classic stocky, tanned, fit alpha male, caught my attention. On the first day of class, we split into teams of 2, and he came straight to me to ask me to be his partner. I said yes. I admit it, I liked him. From the very beginning, I felt comfortable with him. He wasn't as handsome as my husband, Steve. He wasn't in as good shape as Steve. He was older than Steve. He was in his early 40s. So what was it that made me like him so much and so quickly? I don't know, I can't explain it. But I looked forward to spending every day with him. Our time in class quickly turned into going out to dinner together, either with the whole class, the whole group, or just him and me, alone. Have a drink or two and dance a little. I had so much fun with him. I felt so relaxed and at ease with him, but we didn't have sex. Oh, of course I thought about it. Who doesn't? Every evening he accompanied me to my room, we hugged, and went to our rooms. In just 2 days, I began to consider him a very dear friend. That's how quickly my feelings for him developed. But none of this justifies what I did. I take full responsibility for having sex with him. On the last night of class, after dinner, he put his arm around my shoulders for the first time as we walked back to the hotel, and I came close to him and hugged his waist. That's how we returned to the hotel. It just seemed so natural. At the door to my room, I found myself holding his hand and inviting him to come into my room, into my bed, and into my arms. I knew it was wrong. I didn't fully understand why I was doing this. That evening, I didn't even drink anything. But I did it. I deliberately cheated on my husband. I told myself it would only be one time and no one would ever know. No one will get hurt. At that moment, I wanted to be with Mark, and that was stronger than my decency and loyalty to Steve. That was all that was required. A chance opportunity and a bit of rationalization. That was all I needed to do what I knew was wrong. Mark was nice. The sex was much better than with my husband. Add to this the thrill of novelty. As far as lovemaking goes, all I will say is that in terms of size, Mark was slightly less endowed than Steve. So, no, it wasn't that he was any better or worse physically than Steve. But sex with Mark was fun. No, it was joyful and wonderful. He made me reach the peak of pleasure 4 times. I have never experienced the highest point of pleasure with my husband when we made love. As enjoyable as the evening was, it was not worth the pain that followed. How I wish things were different. But what was done was done. The next morning, the rising sun brought with it a feeling of guilt. Guilt hit me like a sledgehammer to the head. Guilt for betraying my husband, guilt for not knowing if Mark was married and having just dealt the death blow to his marriage. Even a feeling of guilt for the peak of pleasure. I couldn't bear to look at myself in the mirror. Mark left early, and I never saw him again. All that day, it seemed to me that I was moving through a thick fog. I don't know how I managed to find the airport and my flight. I was greeted by Steve upon arrival. I put on a bright smile and a joyful, enthusiastic greeting hug. "God, Sarah, you look terrible." These were Steve's first words to me. "We have to get you out of here. I don't want anyone to see you and me in such a terrible state." "Did you sleep in these clothes?" We grabbed my bags and headed home. All the way I managed to restrain myself not to cry. But when we arrived at the house, I almost lost my composure. And when I walked through the front door, I was truly lost. I dropped my carry-on and purse and just started crying. Steve, I have to tell you, everything went as bad as you could imagine. He completely exploded. He called me a fallen woman, a creature, and almost every other derogatory name you could think of. He asked me if I had my period. So why did I do this? Then he began to wonder if I was telling him the whole truth. "But was it just one time, Sarah?" he said. "How should I know?" "I can't believe you're saying that, Steve." "Of course, this is the only time. I told you about this. If I hadn't said anything, you would never have known." "What does he have that I don't?" Steve demanded. Was he good in bed? Does he have a bigger spear than me? Was he prettier? What exactly did he have that I don't have that made you flush 12 years of marriage down the toilet? I don't know. But by this time, I already knew. On the plane, I realized what it was about Mark that made me abandon my marriage vows. He was funny. I felt good and relaxed with him. He was much more attentive in bed than Steve had ever been. But I knew that Steve would throw me out the door if I said all this. I want to get a divorce. Steve, why? I made a mistake. I admit it. I take full responsibility for this. I'll do anything to fix this, I swear. I'm not interested anymore. I just can't believe you did this. Why? What does he have that I don't? Oh, God, I was tempted to tell him. Spit it in his face. But I restrained myself. I don't know. However, Steve wasn't done yet. Am I not good enough for you? He again demanded an answer. Lord, what will all our friends and relatives think when we get divorced? Do you know what I will look like? Everyone will know that we were not a perfect couple. Does it really mean that much to you? Yes. God, how do you think we got to where we are? Because I worked hard to make our relationship perfect and keep it perfect. No, it's all on your conscience. I'll tell everyone that you cheated on me, so at least I'll have my reputation intact. Steve, I said pleadingly, can't you sleep with this for at least one night? I told you, and not even 5 minutes later, you're already talking about divorce? You're damn right, it is. So, just like that, do you not love me anymore? No. Can I earn your trust and love again? Can you forgive me? I will do anything to fix this. I can't forgive you when I don't know why you did it because I don't know what I forgive. I don't want to see your face anymore. We're done. Why? I shouted. Because we had a perfect marriage, and obviously that wasn't enough for you, and you cheated on me. You can't say why you did it. Therefore, it cannot be said that this will never happen again. Even worse, if you don't know why you cheated, chances are that whatever set of conditions caused it is still there, which means you can cheat again. So no thanks. I don't want my heart cut out a second time. But we know that this will not happen. We know. Fuck you, Sarah. Yes, I knew that you would never cheat on me until you did. So we don't know that it won't happen again. I feel like I can't trust you or anything you say, and I won't be able to live in this uncertainty. And I, of course, will not allow your dissolute behavior to affect my reputation in the eyes of society. Steve, this could be anyone's story, not just ours. This has happened to many couples, and they have been through it. This is nothing more than the same risk you would take with anyone you might marry. It's just life, and sometimes we have to put up with the terrible shit it throws at us. Steve, I swear to God, I'll make it up to you if you let me. It wasn't some kind of cataclysm. It was you who stabbed us in the back with your little mistake. And this is a risk that I do not intend to expose myself to a second time. You can't be serious. We wanted to have children. Well, they wanted to. Are you going to throw this away because I cheated once? Don't you want to have children? Become a father? If it were you who deceived, I would forgive you under such circumstances. I would try to figure this out. Figure out where we went wrong and try to fix it. No. It's not we who made a mistake. It's you who threw everything away, and there's a risk that you might do it again. But I will not do this. We already talked about this. You've already sworn once. Your words are not enough. Suddenly, I was overcome with blind rage. Damn you, Steve. Do you think you have it all figured out already? Are you going to throw away all of our time together and the family we could have created because of one time? Because your main concern is how you will appear in society? And then he started saying unforgivable things. Damn you, Sarah. We had everything. We had such a wonderful life. All our friends were jealous of us. And you go and destroy our marriage and you can't even say why? You know damn well why you did it. You wanted this yourself. You were excited, tempted, thought you wouldn't get caught, and thought it would be fun. You ruined the life we could have had. And you can't even say why. So don't expect me to sign up for a sequel. And then he said it. The worst thing that ever happened. Thank God we don't have children yet. Thank God it happened before we got anything done. In that sense, it was a blessing that you were fooling around. So thank you, Sarah. I couldn't stand it. You know, maybe you are right. Maybe my deception was a blessing in disguise. Do you want to know why I slept with him? He made me feel good. It was fun to be with him. I could talk to him without my words being criticized and dissected. And that was before I slept with him. And you know what else? He was better in bed than you. He cared enough to make it good for both of us. So what if my fooling around makes you leave so I can find a better man? It was a blessing back then, and I thank God for it. Well, good news. You start weeding out candidates. That night, he left home. We never communicated again, except through our lawyers, and when the divorce was settled, he moved out of state and did not tell me where he had moved. His threat to tell everyone that it was all my fault? It turned out that it was just a threat. He didn't tell anyone we knew. Not our neighbors, not our friends. Did he just not see the point in it? Or could he not allow himself to be looked at as someone who had been cheated on? For the next 3 months, I went to bed every night wishing I could just die in my sleep. And in the morning, when the sun rose again, it raised me, kicking, screaming, and not wanting to live. It just kept going, no matter what happens, what we do, or how we might feel about it. I did my job on autopilot. I spent lunch at my desk in the office with the door closed, just crying my eyes out. But you can't cry forever. All sorts of shit happens, often far beyond what is possible. But life goes on. When my grief over what I had done passed, when my grief over my lost husband, my broken marriage, my lost chance at a family and a wonderful life passed, I began to return to my normal self. Well, I will always mourn what I lost, and for the way I lost it, for the way Steve and I both lost it. But eventually, I learned to control myself in public. I began to rejoice when I saw the sun rise again. I started looking at men again. A few years later, I learned from his mother that Steve had begun to lose his strength. It became almost impossible to work with him. He was intolerant of any mistake or mishap. It ate into any project at work to such an extent that the project was paralyzed. He then made a series of disastrous decisions at work that cost the company millions. He was fired. He never married again. He became an alcoholic. Without a job and spending all his money on cheap whiskey, he lost his accounts and the bank foreclosed on his house. On the day he was evicted, he ran out onto the roadway and threw himself under a large truck. It seemed he couldn't even forgive himself, let alone anyone else. I cried for several days. It was like losing him, losing my marriage, all over again. Things could have been completely different. Everything could have been much better. With my wrong decision, I endangered our marriage and our lives. It was 100% my fault, forever. But Steve destroyed our marriage and his life because of his absolute unwillingness to forgive and because he was more concerned about his image in the eyes of every other person on earth except us. I cried even more because of all this. In the days and weeks that followed, our story became known to all our friends and neighbors. I wasn't going to lie about anything, not about myself or about Steve. Several friends blamed me and never spoke to me again. But the big surprise for me was how many of our neighbors and friends remained friends with me. They all told me the same thing. They never liked Steve. He was too much of a, look how perfect I am, braggart. He was always quick to point out what he thought was wrong with everything our friends and neighbors were doing. Everyone we knew, mostly socialized, only stay with us because they liked me. Most of our friends told Steve good riddance, and that I was better off without him. One of my biggest supporters was my mother-in-law. She came to the house demanding an explanation. Steve, her own son, didn't tell her why his marriage ended. I told her everything. When I finished, she came up to me and slapped me in the face. "This is because you cheated on my son." Then she hugged me tightly and said, "This is because you got rid of him. Lucky you. I'm sorry I didn't raise a better man for you." We hugged each other and cried for over an hour. Tears were my most frequent companion in the days and weeks that followed. I had something to cry about. But pretty soon, these tears dried up. Time heals all wounds. A few years passed and I got married again and was happy. I had a little boy and a girl. I have never cheated on my new husband. But then, I never loved my first husband, Steve, the way I love my second husband, Fred. This time, being older and wiser, I chose a man with whom I felt good, as I once did with Mark, a man who didn't have a perfection complex. They say that everything happens for a reason. I don't know anything about this. Quite often it seems like shit just happens and everyone catches it sooner or later. Could it be that what I told Steve in our last conversation was true? That my one-time episode of infidelity was my "leave your marriage to a man who won't be a good father" card? I thought Steve was the perfect man in our perfect marriage. But there were no serious checks. When did the inspection happen? He failed. Until I met Mark and spent some time with him, I never knew how exciting spending time with a man could be. Until then, I never realized how tough and unforgiving Steve was, or what an inconsiderate lover Steve was. Or at least I wasn't consciously aware of any of this. So, was my cheating episode my subconscious's way of freeing me from this marriage? Or was it God's plan for me to learn what it was like to have an unforgiving spouse, so that I would better appreciate my second husband and understand what I could lose if I never forgive? I regret cheating on Steve every day. I wish I had not dealt such a terrible blow to our marriage. I wish Steve would be just a little more understanding. If he stayed, I would do everything to make him happy. And I mean anything. But what was done was done. And it was in the next stage that we moved to from this point that Steve failed. Or was it me who failed? But I would never have understood Steve's true nature if I had not made my terrible mistake. And once we had children, it would be too painful to leave. And I wouldn't have the life that Fred and I have now, and with our children. Did my first marriage really have to break up to understand all this? Maybe my cheating episode was supposed to be a chance for Steve to learn, grow, and overcome all the bad things that can happen in life. His chance to learn forgiveness, at least a little leniency to preserve a good marriage and life together. But he ruined everything. Without the ability to forgive, I don't think any of us will last long in this world. Steve couldn't. If these were the lessons we were all meant to learn, I wish they weren't so painful. And it didn't end well for Steve. But we can all want whatever we want. God has his own plans for us. We may not like it, but we must learn from it. I don't know. What I do know is that when my husband, Fred, returned home from a long trip, I saw that something was wrong. He admitted that he slept with another woman on the trip. I hugged him and said, "Fine. I understand how this could happen. We will find out what is wrong between us, what caused this, and we will fix it. We'll deal with that." It took some time, but much less than you might think. Hurt feelings? We had a whole truckload of all this stuff. I had to figure it out just like anyone else in a similar situation. But we met the problems head on, together. We had to turn to a marriage counselor to help us cope with this, but even in the most difficult moment, we did not even think to say the word divorce. Our children never knew about our problems. We kept our marriage and our family intact, and we built stronger, even more committed relationships than before. And it was good that we did, because life for us does not end until we find ourselves in the grave, and as the years passed, many more life trials stood before us. Financial questions, work matters, diseases, temptation from others for both of us, problems with children as they grow older. We've both made mistakes, but we forgive each other and moved on. And this is what we taught our children as best we could. You are human. You will make mistakes and make bad decisions. You can hurt others intentionally or unintentionally, and others will hurt you. The only saving grace, straight from God, is forgiveness. Fred and I have survived all of life's challenges. We have built a wonderful life together for ourselves and our children. Perfection or forgiveness. As human beings, we cannot be perfect, and even if we could, I suspect we wouldn't be very happy with it. And the pursuit of this only leads to destruction. So thank God for forgiveness. You can have anything you want. The only thing that limits us from forgiveness is ourselves. This was the true story of a very dear friend. When it all blew up, believe it or not, even the most judgmental among us were glad to see Steve leave Sarah. Nobody could stand this guy. And no one was surprised that she cheated on him with the first man she came across, who showed that her life could be better. Part of this was due to the fact that Sarah got married so young. She didn't know that life and marriage could be any different. But it was a calculated move on Steve's part. This idiot decided that he could boss her around, humiliate her at every turn, and she was forced to accept it. We all used to say, the only reason he got married was so he could have someone to criticize who couldn't just leave him. This guy was the worst kind of asshole. So, my dear, whether you are husband or wife, remember this lesson. If you constantly put your spouse down, don't be surprised when some casual acquaintance comes along one day and shows them that life doesn't have to be a meaningless pursuit of unattainable perfection. And for goodness sake, what if your significant other makes the same mistake? Before you walk out the door, consider looking in the mirror and asking yourself, why did I get cheated on? Was it me? Especially if the other half shows true repentance for their actions. Without forgiveness, none of us will last long, and we will never know true happiness. I know this will be a tough pill to swallow for many, but you know what? Nobody ever said life would be easy, right? But it can be worth it if we are willing to make it worth it. Be kind to each other. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.